Subscribe Trend Media. Here's what actually happened recently in the South China Sea, and maybe even more importantly, what would truly escalate the situation beyond its current state. In this concise deep dive, you'll get a clear understanding of the event's timeline, the specific geography, the relevant legal status of the area, and those crucial red lines navies are pretty careful not to cross. Okay, so as of early last week, initial reports confirmed a significant close pass interaction. We're talking a U.S. Navy destroyer and a PLA Navy cruiser. It involved hails, challenges to their course, standard stuff in some ways, but tense. Both sides put out statements pretty quickly. Crucially, no shots fired. So we're going to pull back the curtain on three critical questions here. Where exactly did this happen? What's the actual playbook for these interactions at sea? And maybe most importantly, what would really push this beyond this sort of brinkmanship into a real full-blown crisis? So let's unpack this. Looking at the sequence of events, based on what we know, what was the initial action that really set the specific incident in motion? Why was that first step so critical?
Well, based on the initial reports and the naval statements that came out, it seems the incident kicked off, not dramatically, but with a subtle yet pretty critical maneuver. A U.S. naval vessel, a destroyer specifically, started with a series of radio hails, and it adjusted its course. You can think of it as a polite but definitely firm declaration of presence, basically asserting a right to be in that specific spot. That was really the first key move in this very deliberate high-stakes stance.
Okay, so one vessel makes a clear, assertive move. How did the other ship, the PLA cruiser, respond to that? And just how close are we talking? How close did they actually get?
Right, the response was almost immediate.
Yeah.
The PLA Navy cruiser made a specific course change and initiated a close approach. The reported pass distance was, get this, less than 200 yards.
Wow, that's close.
That is incredibly close for two warships of this size. I mean, that's close enough. You can clearly see faces on the bridge of the other ship. You definitely feel the tension at that range. And it immediately triggered those accusations of unsafe maneuvering from, well, at least one side. Both parties naturally logged everything, meticulously communications, maneuvers, and then pretty quickly publicized their own versions of what happened, trying to justify their actions on the global stage,
Yeah, what's really insightful there is how fast the rhetoric escalates, the political accusations fly, even when zero shots are fired. It's clearly not just about the ships being near each other. It's about those exact maneuvers and how they get interpreted or maybe spun in the bigger geopolitical picture. Okay, so we've mapped out the sequence. But the critical question that comes right after is, where did this happen? Why does this specific location ignite such complex legal and, frankly, political fireworks? Let's get into the map and the law.
Absolutely crucial. The incident took place near Second Thomas Shoal. That's in the Spratly Islands, which is, as you know, hotly contested territory. Understanding this location is key because it immediately drags in this fascinating, though, complex web of international maritime law. When you talk about boundaries and rights at sea, there are really three crucial terms we need to understand. First, you've got the territorial sea. Think of this as a 12 nautical mile zone stretching out from a nation's coastline. Within this zone, the coastal state has full sovereignty, just like it does on land. But there's an important caveat. The internationally recognized right of innocent passage for foreign vessels. They can transit through, but without stopping or doing anything hostile.
Okay, 12 miles out, it's like their territory, but ships can pass through peacefully. And beyond that 12-mile mark, what changes then? That's where it gets fuzzier for countries, right?
It's exactly. Beyond the territorial sea, you hit the exclusive economic zone, or EEZ. This goes out much further, up to 200 nautical miles from the baseline. Now, within its EEZ, a coastal state has sovereign rights for specific things, exploring and exploiting natural resources, so fishing, oil, gas, and building things like artificial islands or installations. However, and this is a huge point of contention in the South China Sea, there's a widely recognized international right of freedom of navigation and overflight for all states within an EEZ. This means other countries can sail through, fly over, conduct military activities, basically operate there without needing permission. And that's often where you see the legal sparks fly. And then there are international streets norms. These are very specific legal rules for passage through narrow waterways, vital for global navigation. Think of critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. Huge amounts of oil pass through there, or the Malacca Strait, a major shipping lane. These norms basically guarantee unhindered passage, even if the strait technically falls within a nation's territorial waters. It keeps global commerce and military movement flowing.
Right, and this sounds exactly like where we often hear the term freedom of navigation operations, or FONOPs. Can you just clarify what those are in this very specific, often tense context?
Yeah, FONOPs are operations conducted specifically by navies. The U.S. Navy is the most prominent example precisely to challenge maritime claims they see as excessive under international law. They're designed to assert and demonstrate adherence to those internationally recognized rights and freedoms navigation. Overflight, particularly, where those rights are being challenged by a nation's expansive claims. It's basically a maritime legal argument conducted by sailing. You sail through disputed waters without asking permission, implicitly denying the legitimacy of the claim you think is excessive. So the core legal friction, particularly in this region, boils down to these expansive lines or claims some nations assert. China's 9-dash line being the most famous example, covering most of the South China Sea versus the internationally recognized right of transit and operations, especially in EEZs and international waters. And look, this isn't just dry legal stuff. It's the actual language of geopolitical power plays. Understanding these zones' territorial sea, EEZ, is absolutely key to decoding the highly political language everyone involved uses. When one side claims sovereignty over an area where another insists on freedom of navigation, well, that's exactly where you get these tense encounters like the one we're discussing.
It really does make more sense when you frame it that way. These aren't just random lines on a map. Knowing the zone territorial sea, EEZ tells you immediately how political the language is going to get. The rules, the assertions, they change completely depending on where you are.
Okay, so we've grounded ourselves in the geography and the critical legal bits. Now here's where it gets really interesting for anyone trying to follow naval interactions. The actual at-sea playbook. How do ships behave in these incredibly close passes? What are the standard operating procedures, the protocols, when two powerful navies find themselves maybe just yards apart?
Well, when ships get close, especially in contested waters, there are definitely established protocols. The first step is usually clear communication. We're talking radio hails, warnings, bridge-to-bridge communications. This is essentially ships talking openly to each other, usually in English, trying to clarify intentions, warn about upcoming maneuvers, or maybe demand the other vessel explain itself. It's a crucial first step for de-escalation, or at least for clarity. So it's not just chaos out there. There are actual rules of the road, even for warships operating in these tense situations.
Oh, absolutely. Navies worldwide adhere strictly to the call regs as the Convention on the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea. Think of them as the world's most serious traffic laws, but for the ocean. And instead of fender benders, the stakes are, geopolitical crises. Call regs dictate everything. Required lights, sound signals, rules for steering, sailing, speed, course changes, all designed to prevent collisions. They define who has the right of way in different situations and what actions each vessel must take. Any deviation is instantly noted and recorded. Beyond those formal rules, you also have common shadowing conventions. This is where one ship follows another, often at what's considered a safe but still close distance, mainly just to observe and gather intelligence. And during these encounters, both sides are meticulously collecting evidence. We're talking high-res photos, continuous video recordings, precise timestamps for every single maneuver, and detailed track data using GPS and radar. This documentation is absolutely vital. For their own internal reports, sure, but more importantly, for any public statements, diplomatic protests, or even legal challenges that might follow. It's all about building a precise, verifiable record of exactly what happened.
Okay, so there are rules, there's communication, there's evidence gathering. But when do these maneuvers, even with all of that, cross the line from just standard shadowing or a close pass into something that's really considered unsafe? What makes it unsafe beyond just being too close?
Right. Unsafe maneuvering in a naval context isn't just about proximity. It's very specific and carries a lot of weight. It includes things like generating a high wake too close to another vessel's hull. That wake, the wave churned up by the ship, can cause violent rocking, stress the hull of the other ship, potentially damage equipment, especially on smaller vessels. Imagine a massive wave hitting you unexpectedly. That's the kind of danger. Another critical unsafe action is performing a dangerous crossing within a short, risky distance. This is basically cutting in front of another vessel without leaving enough space or time for it to react safely. It forces the other ship to suddenly change course or speed just to avoid a collision. It's seen as highly provocative because it directly puts the other vessel in danger. And finally, boxing in another vessel. This means intentionally limiting its ability to maneuver, sort of trapping it or forcing it onto an undesirable course. That's considered extremely aggressive. These specific actions are viewed as highly provocative because they directly endanger the other vessel and its crew. They make a collision seem imminent unless the other side takes rapid defensive action.
This brings up a really important, maybe even chilling question. We're talking about brinkmanship, this high-stakes game. But what would truly escalate things from this kind of tension to a full-blown crisis? What are the clear, universally understood red lines that if crossed, just change everything instantly.
Yeah, the red lines are very clear, and navies globally understand just how serious they are. The first one is a fire control radar lock. This is when a vessel's targeting radar, the one designed to guide weapons like missiles or guns, locks onto another ship. That ping you might hear about isn't just observation, it's the digital equivalent of pointing a loaded weapon. It tells the crew on the receiving end, unequivocally, that they're being actively targeted, not just watched. It signals weapons could be employed. It's considered an act of aggression, definitely not just observation.
So if that specific radar pings you, it means they're past-looking, they're actively preparing to shoot. That's a fundamental shift.
Exactly. Another crystal clear red line is any hull contact or damage, even if it seems minor. A collision, even a small scrape between warships, is a major international incident. It signals either a catastrophic loss of control, maybe an intentional act, or extreme negligence, all highly escalatory. It's a physical violation. The presence of kinetic debris near another ship's hull is also a big one. We're talking things like chaff, those tiny metallic strips or flares, the bright decoy lights. They're countermeasures, normally used to fool incoming missiles. But if they're deployed too close to another vessel, especially inappropriately, it's not just harassment. It can be seen as direct intimidation, maybe a warning shot, or even an attempt to cause actual damage, like starting a fire or damaging intakes.
And then I suppose the really obvious ones, the ones we all hope never ever happen.
Indeed. Any weapons discharge, firing a weapon, even if it's not directly at the other ship, or any attempt at forced boarding of a foreign military vessel. Those would immediately, unequivocally escalate things to a crisis. They are essentially acts of war. Finally, we also have to consider the air layer above the ships. Unsafe intercepts of patrol aircraft operating near the ships are also critical red lines. Think back to the EP-3 incident in 2001, that mid-air collision between a U.S. surveillance plane and a Chinese fighter jet after an unsafe intercept. Chinese pilot died. The U.S. plane made an emergency landing in China. That single event, with no weapon fired, plunged U.S.-China relations into crisis for months. Aggressive flying by aircraft too close, dangerous maneuvers, deploying countermeasures nearby mirrors the danger of unsafe ship handling and can easily lead to disaster.
Wow. Any single one of those moves this from tense brinkmanship, as you said, to a full-blown crisis. These aren't minor slip-ups. They are internationally recognized triggers for severe escalation. Every Navy understands this.
That's a truly sobering thought. So with that really clear framework in mind, what signals should we and our listeners be watching for right now immediately that tell us if tensions are actually rising or if things are starting to cool down after an incident like this?
You definitely want to pay close attention to several key indicators in the aftermath. First, look at the official statements coming from both sides. Is the language hardening, becoming more aggressive, more accusatory? Or are you seeing subtle shifts towards de-escalation, maybe calls for dialogue, or emphasizing a desire for stability? The specific words chosen by top officials are incredibly telling.
Okay, so watch the words. What about actions? On the water, in the air, what practical signs should we be looking for? On the water and in the air, keep an eye out for new exercise notices or even missile tests conducted near the area, the corridor, where the incident happened. These can be direct signals of intent, a show of force, or maybe a deliberate attempt to assert control over that disputed area by declaring temporary closures. Also, watch very closely for reports of maritime militia clustering. These often look like large groups of fishing vessels, but they aren't always just fishing. These groups, while not formal warships, can be used to assert presence, harass other ships, or just generally complicate maritime operations. It's a classic gray zone tactic. Makes it harder to assign blame directly to a state's navy. You should also keep an eye out for official NOTAMs notices to airmen or NaviWarn's navigational warnings. These are public notices, usually issued through official channels. They warn about upcoming drills, live fire exercises, other military activities in specific sea or airspaces. They're basically public announcements of planned activity. And finally, if you have access, you can monitor ship movements. Publicly available satellite imagery, sometimes port imagery, can show unusual ship rotations, deployments, maybe vessels being rapidly outfitted in major naval bases. These can indicate a change in military posture or readiness to send more assets to the region.
So lots to watch. What's the bottom line here? If you had to pick one, what's the single biggest red flag you could see in the immediate aftermath that would truly suggest a dangerous escalation is underway?
I'd say this. If you see multiple close passes in the same corridor within days, maybe involving different ships or repeat interactions between the same ones, that repetition is key. It suggests a deliberate pattern, not just an isolated incident or a one-off miscalculation. That, to me, would be a clear signal of escalating intent, and a calculated decision to increase pressure, that's when the risk really starts to climb significantly.
Okay, a really useful framework. So this week's checklist for you watching, keep an eye out for those new exercise notices, any unusual ship rotations coming out of key ports, reports of air intercepts in the region, and of course watch the diplomatic calendars for relevant meetings or statements. We'll definitely be watching closely here, and we'll update you as new facts and developments emerge from the South China Sea. Subscribe for daily map first breakdowns. Next, tap New U.S. tariffs, what's hit and who pays to see the consumer impact, or National Guard in D.C., what federal control changes now for the security picture at home. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.